people, you can make a living from judo. You know what I mean? Like you can make a living from judo where 10 years ago, like to make a living from judo, it was like, no, we don't make a living from judo. It's volunteer based. Like what?
Right.
But you go, no, if we can make a living, we can impact way more people's lives and run a better service. Right. And it actually does the judo community a service as well.
All right. Hello, I'm with Matt DeCino, and finally getting to meet him in person. And the thing, if you haven't met or seen or watched video, is the way that I refer to you is like the OG for making online content for judo. And so one thing that's really interesting to me, obviously you're also an Olympic athlete for Australia, but it's really interesting to know what got you doing that when really people weren't, especially for judo, that wasn't really happening at the time. So yeah, I'd love to know how that got started for you.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm the OG. I think Radi's up there, Radi Ferguson. He's pretty close. He's definitely before me. And there was that other guy that ran the Judo Info, Neil Oakenhamp from England. He did a lot of content. Okay. But I did mainly video content. But I kind of got into video content and blogging and stuff for 3 reasons. And it was kind of all kind of happening at the same time sort of thing. So the first one was I used to do one-on-ones teaching people judo.
Right.
And then I would teach them, judo. And then a week later, I'd be like, do you remember what we did last week? They're like, no. Nah. So then they'd spend 20 minutes, the 1 hour session rehashing what we did the week later. So then I filmed it, chucked it online. I said, hey, make sure you watch those videos that we did last week and then refresh you. So when I come in to teach you the next one-on-one, you've kind of refreshed your brains. That was the first reason. And then people started inboxing me going, I love that Oh Goshy video. It was so good. I'm going, really? Like, it's just like basics. And so then I started making more content. That was the first one. And secondly, I just learned some stuff really late on in my judo career that was basic information to all these other people. Like I remember I was at a training camp and I said to this other Morgan, one of the Australians, I said, what do you do when someone's like top gripping you and I've got an inside grip, but I'm getting crushed? And he said, mate, what are you doing? Like, you don't put your hand here. It's got to be up at the ear. You got to put and that way they can't crush you in. And I was like, oh, he's like, how do you not know this? I'm like, I don't know. No one's taught me that.
Right.
So I started kind of whacking content up to help people, educate people, I guess, earlier than what I got educated at. So now I've got green belts that know more grip fighting than I knew as a black belt because of all the content that I can chuck online and other people as well. So that's kind of how I got kind of involved in it, I guess.
Right. Yeah. It's funny too, as someone that's done judo their whole life as well, there's certain things that naturally get learned that aren't necessarily taught to us that have incredible power. So as an example, I was teaching a class and I had an older gentleman. He hadn't done judo in 25 years, decided to come back to judo to put his kids in it. They did it for a couple of years and then they trailed off, but he stuck around. So he's 52 years old doing judo. Awesome. In the best shape of his life. And he says to me at one point, what do you do about stiff arms? And it's funny as a high performance joker, when you're competing internationally, that's not really the question that you think of. Like stiff arms, at some point in your life, it goes away. Is sort of how I think of it. No one ever taught me, hey, when someone has a stiff arm, this is what you do. It sort of goes away as you compete. And then I went, I don't know. Here, take a grip and stiff arm me. So he takes a grip, stiff arms me. I go, what would I do here? Oh, this little thing. And I went, that's what I do. But so much of the things that we learn, it's from mimicking other people or naturally happens. And then we've done it so long, we sort of forget when it went away. That went away from me 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And
even when you teach it, you're highlighting these 5 things, but you're actually doing another 5 things that you don't even know you're doing. And then the other people are doing it and you're like, that doesn't look like mine. I know I said that, but it just doesn't. Come here. Then you do it and then they do it. And you're like, come back. Oh, I forgot to mention this, and this. And that's the hardest part of teaching is like, that's why when I do my DVDs, you try to systematize it. Like you can layer up, and that's the skill of teaching, isn't it? Doing is one thing.
Right.
The skill of teaching is another. Trying to go, what am I naturally doing that I don't know that I'm doing? And that's called tacit knowledge, I think. And tacit knowledge is like,
yeah. The thing that's funny, I had the exact same experience. I remember I was explaining to someone the importance of what I wanted them to do with kochigari. And I was taking this little step that I didn't even realize I was taking. And the person goes, what'd you do there? And I went, what do you mean? I didn't do anything. No, there, you did it. You did it again. And the one thing that's interesting as well is like you, part of our introduction prior to this, I guess, is we were both blogging, making videos. You shared one of my armbar videos that I'd made, different ways to deal with someone locking up a juji, is that when you record it, it's a very honest version of what you're really doing. So you can think, because someone told you, even, it might be subconscious, this is the importance of this technique. But then when you do it and you watch it and you see a video of yourself doing it, actually, that's not the part that I'm emphasizing when I actually perform it properly. And so when you see the video, then you see all those little things that you don't even realize. So that's another layer of learning that I found from making those videos, is like, actually, when I think I did a good one, it's actually something else that I'm emphasizing.
Yes. I know once I was filming I just filmed a randori session at the club, like a fly on the wall sort of camera.
Right.
And then I re-watching it, I'm like, what was I thinking there? What am I doing? You know, jiu-jitsu, they do like those live commentaries where they commentate as they're kind of sparring, or they're doing rolls or newaza. And I'm like, sometimes I've watched myself, I'm like, I didn't attack once in like 5 minutes. What am I possibly?
Right.
I'm so lazy. Like, what the heck? It's so funny, isn't it?
Right. And I spoke to recently, I did a podcast with Emidio Centracchio. So he does judo data. So I don't know if you've seen his website or not, but it's pretty cool. So he's producing these baseball statistics for judo for the entire international tour, every event. He's now doing the European championships and the Pan Am championships for the first time ever, but he does the whole year IGF tour. And the thing that he mentioned that was funny in that same regard is talking to high performance athletes about what they think the success rate of their throw is. Oh, my uchimata is deadly. I throw with it 40% of the time when I attack. Well, actually, you throw about 10% of the time, that kind of thing. Or we think of ourselves as an aggressive fighter, maybe. And then you do a video review of your tournament and you go, now I know why I got, those Shidos. Like, we're very good liars at what to ourselves, right? Like we like to sometimes see, like, how could this possibly happen to me? I was doing so great. And then you watch it and you're like, I didn't attack in 5 minutes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Or, those ones are like, oh, I lost by a Yuko. You're like, that was a big Yuko, but you would know, I lost by a penalty, but that was a big penalty. Like, you were nowhere near winning that match.
Right. Yeah.
I just lost by a small Yuko, man. I was so close.
Right.
You were.
Right.
It was a long.
Yeah. The other way, I mean, as ridiculous and cheesy as a line as it is too, there is the Fast and Furious line. It doesn't matter if you lose by an inch or a mile or whatever he says, some cheesy Vin Diesel line, but it's true to agree. It's like, it's the end result is important. And just because you only won by a little, well, maybe someone held on to that score. Maybe they played more defensively and they didn't dust you because they didn't feel the need to, or they're preparing for the next match or whatever it is. So yeah, that's like, that's pretty interesting. So the other part that I was interested in as a Canadian, we obviously have a certain amount of judo that is alive and well and coming out of COVID, but I was curious what the scene is like in Australia. Like how big is judo in Australia? Do you have any idea how many people practice judo? And
so I think in Australia we have kind of 3 or 4 federations, but the judo, the one attached to the IJF, is the biggest one. I think there's maybe 6,000 or 7,000 members, which is is kind of the main one. And then the other federations have maybe 500 or 300. They fizzle off pretty quick. So the one attached to OJU, Oceania, and then attached to IJF is about 7,000 members, which I think is the biggest it's ever been, kind of around now. Like, it's the biggest our federation's ever been.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. I think what's helped is a lot more clubs becoming full-time. A lot of athletes now turning to judo, and like myself and Ivo dos Santos, another Olympian, Dennis Iverson, Daniel Kelly, all running kind of dojos now. So that's kind of our numbers. We have the biggest competition for us is the big 4. Like, you guys would have like ice hockey, baseball, maybe American football. I don't know about in Canada, but in Australia you have soccer, rugby league, rugby union, Australian football, which is another one. So we've got like 4 football codes, and then basketball and netball. So they're kind of the major 6, and cricket. So they're the major 6 sports that are kind of defeating judo.
Yeah, the 2 things you mentioned that make me giggle a little. Number one is cricket, the one sport that is not understood by North Americans in any way at all, other than thinking it has a funny name. And then the other one is ice hockey. As a Canadian, we just call it hockey, but so much of the world calls it ice hockey, which stands out as like a funny way to us because hockey is on ice, but I guess it's often referred to as ice hockey. what's the so I know of, for instance, at the moment, there's the Katz brothers, but in terms of like the high performance group, is that something that you've seen building, growing as your time as a former Olympian yourself and being connected to that program?
Yeah, like I was even talking to one of my friends who went to Beijing with me, and just about like how broken we are compared to the next generation are way more elite in sports science, recovery,
Right.
judo. I think they're more highly skilled, more tactical, and just physically just way better. I think our kind of generation is kind of that brute force, that Japanese system of just more randoris, like
Right.
just national training camps with just 20 rounds of 5 minutes every day, 6 days a
Right.
week. And the sports scientists were like, maybe we should like dial it back a little bit. Like, shut up, you know nothing about judo. This is what they do in Japan.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Right.
And
Right.
but now the new generation of coaches are going, okay, sports scientist, what should we be doing? And
Right.
let's work together and bring some sports science into the training camps.
Right.
And so I think that's really carried over. So I think now the elite guys now are much more elite than us, I think, in terms of just overall professionalism.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's
I think, for instance, like understanding recovery has become a huge thing. There's a lot of people studying sleep now. And I remember reading and writing about the Toronto Blue Jays, for instance, creating these sleep corridors in all their facilities all over the place. Because if you're not recovered, it doesn't matter. And there's a Andrew Huberman one that talks about it. And there's another guy that wrote a book. I can't think of his name right now, but he made a reference to the fact that if you sleep 6 hours a night instead of 8 hours a night on average, and you're a male, then you have the testosterone production of someone 10 years your senior. So you're literally aging yourself 10 years by sleeping 6 hours instead of 8 hours a night, which can be affected by just fixing your sleep, just getting proper sleep. The other thing that he referred to is there was a study by NCAA Division I or Division II women's softball. So they had the softball teams. They had them sleep 10 hours total a day. It didn't mean 10 hours at once, but it included napping. When they had them sleep 10 hours, they had a measurable improvement in the accuracy they throw a ball, the speed with which they run, the force with which they project a ball. Measurable just by sleeping that much more. And I think those are the types of things where exactly we had these, like, growing up in the 80s and people before, this is what you do. You just fight and brutalize, and the last one standing becomes the best. But there's lots of ways to recover. And if you don't give yourself a chance to recover, you can't perform.
Yeah, so true. I remember sleeping was so tough for me being an athlete. Like, I'd grind my teeth every night because you're overtrained, you're stressed.
Right.
You've got tournaments coming up, you got to get points for funding and all that stuff. As soon as I retired from competition, stopped grinding my teeth, sleep like a baby. But I remember just up all night with those meditation, the waves or whatever, just trying to sleep in the because your body's overtrained. And so you just can't, you're just too tired to sleep.
Yeah.
Rather than now, you can map your sleeping and going, oh, my heart rate's up. I'm going to have this session off or dial it back a bit so I can sleep better. It's long term, it's going to be better for me. So I think now they're just way more, the science is just so much better.
Yeah, we get so overstimulated. I used to have the worst time sleeping the night before. So I did something that I thought was really weird, and then it's now become a thing. I'm not pretending like I invented it, but when I was like 11, 12 years old, I was staying in a hotel, and as you know, hotel bathrooms, they never have a window, never have anything. So it's 12 at night, I'm fighting the next day, and I can't sleep. So I decided to have a bath in the pitch black. And I thought, this is weird, but I'm trying something. And I relaxed. It allowed me to like really calm, became very meditative. It calmed me down, relaxed me a little bit. And then I went to bed and I fell asleep after. And this became a pattern. And then years later, this would have been 1993 or something. And then years later, I start hearing guys like Joe Rogan talk about sensory deprivation tanks. And I went, oh, it's not totally weird. I sort of accidentally fell into doing this sort of thing and how beneficial that can be. It's like, all of that stuff, like I literally couldn't sleep. I'd be so excited about the tournament the next day, not necessarily excited in a good way, anxiety / excited, and I would just be rattling in bed, like trying to sleep. So that's one that's like, and the other one to that same point in terms of just understanding things is me reading more about sports and other references of sports preparation and sports sciences. This is probably one you'll get to is, you know, when you say, oh, you're getting ready for a judo match, and in Canada, they often call it a fight, is you need to get amped up, right? Everybody needs to get amped up. So you should be listening to heavy metal or AC/DC or whatever. You need to get amped up for that match. But in reality, some people are over amped up and it's anxiety. So just those little things, like maybe that person needs to listen to music to calm them because they're overstimulated, where we automatically think, since it's a fight, everybody needs to get revved up to go. And what I wish I knew is I was one of those people that I should have been listening to Mozart or something, you know? I think.
Well, at the start of my career, I would be listening to Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, like
Right.
when we were young,
Right.
and Eminem and all that stuff all day.
Right.
By the end of my career, I'm listening to like Pete Murray, Switchfoot, like all these like chilled out sort of music. Because you're right, you get overstimulated, and you just try to relax. I remember my judo coach. I was at a US Open, and he's literally standing there in his gi, and that was one of my first trips. And they're like, you know, Tom Hill, you're fighting. It was actually his fighting Dave Camarillo. He's like, just walks on the mat. I'm like, he doesn't even warm up. He just walks on the mat, like. Just realizing so many people have different styles of doing stuff, and but you actually saying to people like, this is what I do, this guy listens to Limp Bizkit, this guy listens to Mozart, find what works for you. Like that's the biggest one. And to be able to go, are you overly stimulated, are you not stimulated enough, like, and just kind of
like if you feel like you're sleepy going into the match, then maybe you do need Limp Bizkit, you know, or maybe something new and more modern, you know, not 2000.
I was thinking, I know, hey, so funny.
But if you're overstimulated and you're a person that deals with anxiety and anxiety going into a match, you probably don't need stimulation. You probably need to chill out. You probably need to breathe, because when you get your hands on someone, your mind's probably racing too much. You need to relax so that you can actually use it. Like judo is a lot more than a physical action. Right? It's a chess game. And if your brain's not working properly, you're not playing chess. You're just an athletic person moving around the mats.
Oh, exactly right.
Yeah. So when you coach,
exactly. I remember once.
No, go ahead. Sorry, we had a little internet glitch there for a sec, I think.
No, that's right. You go, and I'll whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So I was going to say, in terms of that, I always find it interesting what the process is outside of, and you talked about this a little bit before in terms of gripping, outside of just teaching the actual technique. And you don't have to give me any secret sauce recipes, but what kind of processes do you have to help produce more than just someone that understands how a technique works, but a systematic approach, or do you have that, or processes so that they can perform more than just entering a technique?
Yeah. So, you know, Ko Terra, you know, that jiu-jitsu guy?
Yeah.
He's got a thing on his wall that says technique conquers all. And you're like, well, technique does conquer all, but it also doesn't conquer all, because strategy and tactics actually feed into technique. And so often I'll teach a move, like, for example, say we're doing Koichi Makokomi. I'll teach, hey guys, here's how you do Koichi Makokomi, but here's how it works in Randori. I do a COE. I might get a score, as Ippon Tsunagi. I might get a score. He might get out of it. But either way, when we re-grip up, my opponent's going to be thinking he does a COE. And I'm going to play on that. I'm going to fake the COE. When he sits back on it, I do Koichi Makokomi. So I'm giving them the mindset and the strategy behind the technical application. If we only do technique, then it's like tech doesn't work. It's technique and strategy that come together, and mindset and scenario that then makes a score actually work, or a technique actually work. So that's what I try to get people, like, what is your, and I know Roddy Ferguson once said, you got to be a master salesman. Like, you got to sell a technique to your opponent. So you think they think something, and then you do something else. And so I really try to helpfully teach, I'm thinking this, they're thinking that, and that's why I'm going to do this, and this is why it's going to work. But if I'm thinking this and they're thinking that, this is not going to work. And so trying to get that, it's actually not about, sometimes not about what I want, it's about what you're thinking, and what you're giving me will then dictate what I want. So does that make sense? We're trying to teach scenario. So for example, me and you are right on right, just a standard right-handed grip. You've got my right sleeve, I've got your right sleeve. You try to do Ogoshi, but I've got your right sleeve. So you can't get your arm around my waist. And so we teach beginners Ogoshi, but then they try to do it in Randori, and like, I can't get my arm around because he's got the sleeve grip and he can't get. So I go, well, okay, well in Randori, I break the sleeve, I fake a top grip, they block it, and then and so we're teaching them scenario plus technique, not just technique on its own. So that's, I think what I try to do, which it's that deeper level of understanding that I hopefully get people thinking, like you said, thinking about judo, rather than just doing judo.
Yeah. And so my next question, I guess, would be is when do you introduce that? Because I'm a huge advocate of that same thing. The reference that I like to use is we have two people, they have a grip, small children. So everyone's seen this a million times. You teach a small kid Osoto. Two kids are doing judo. One kid wants to do Osoto. One pushes, the one who tries Osoto gets slammed. He doesn't want to do Osoto anymore. Problem is not his Osoto, right? The problem is the other guy's arms are in the way, or other girls. Exactly. And so when do you start introducing the aspects to make that throw more available? Do you do that when you are teaching the throw, or do you do that soon after they've mastered a technique to some degree? When do you introduce that stage?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest parts. I try to avoid teaching grip fighting to beginners to intermediates, but you also know that the longevity of their judo career is also based on the grip fighting. So it's like, firstly, you'll find some people will ask the questions. Okay, cool. How does this work in Randori though? So the student's asking the question. So then you then answer the question. Okay, well, I'd actually do this. And so I think it depends what the class looks like. And it depends on what the questions they're asking, and it just depends on who they are. So it's kind of, I don't really have a system of when, but for example, for the kids, I will teach Osoto, and then I'll teach you, here's how to do Osoto, go and do it. Okay, now we're going to do Randori. One kid's going to have a nice collarbone grip. Your Uki's going to have a grip down somewhere down near the belly button. Go and do Osotogari. Who wins and why? And then the kid with the top grip is obviously going to win because they've got more posture control, better Kazushi. And then hopefully the kids will be like, so you only do Osoto when the sleeve's down here, a little pedals down here. That's right. So that's kind of
sort of leading them on their own journey to find the answer and then come back to you with that answer rather than you necessarily providing that answer. And that doesn't mean they may start to make the gripping adjustments, or that's the hope, without you teaching ways that can be defensive of ripping grips off and things like that. Like just knowing more about when the right time to do something is, rather than necessarily grip fighting to get to the right time.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So it also depends on who's in the class and that sort of stuff, and go from there.
Right. Yeah. And as like private clubs or any scenario, you teach judo, if you don't have a massive program where you have every single age and rank separated, you're always going to have this mixed group that you're teaching, this mixed group of mixed skills. So that like, obviously that's always the challenge. I guess the next is in terms of newaza. I personally love to teach a lot of newaza early on. And even the older people are, the slower I am to transition to them randori. Personally, tachiwaza randori. Falling can be scary. I like to take time. And if someone's never been thrown before and they're 35 and 6'2", it's really scary. So I was curious what I'm not sure, are you a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, or? Black. Oh, black. Sorry. So as a double-barreled black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, for judo specifically, how much newaza you're putting in, how much that is more early on potentially, or?
For beginners, I actually just slide them straight into whatever class we're doing. So if we're doing Uchimata that day and there's a brand newbie, they do Uchimata that day. But we just look after them. So, hey guys, this is Josh. It's his first class. Don't throw him. Okay, cool, no worries. So Josh is in there. He's doing Uchimata. And he's practicing it, and he's having fun, and he's making friends with all the class, but he's not getting thrown. So I won't go, he's a beginner, so we're going to do newaza. But we try to do newaza every class, and they'll just become a part of it. But I'm really big on, hey guys, so for example, last night I taught a class, and I had like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, but Judo white belt. I had black belts and brown belts, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, so a whole mix of different arts and knowledge. So, okay, everyone, we're going to warm up with, we're going to do a warm up, and then after that, the Newaza component, we're going to do Jujigatami. So you've got either. You can do this Jujigatami if you've never done it before. You can do this one. If you do a bit more jiu-jitsu, you're going to do a cutting armbar from guard. And then when the arm comes over, you're going to do a belly down armbar and re-roll. You can do that, or you can do whatever armbar you want. So I kind of give people 3 options.
Right.
And then they can choose which one they want to do. And so that's how I kind of run classes. I kind of differentiate. Hey guys, we're doing Uchimata tonight. Beginners, you're going to do this Uchimata. Intermediates, you're going to do this one. Advanced, you can do whatever you like, as long as it's finishing with or starting with Uchimata. So we're all doing the same technique at different levels.
Right.
That's how I differentiate it.
In terms of your skill set as a black belt in both, more than a black belt, you're a 4th degree black belt in judo, but and an Olympian in judo as well. But in terms of teaching, are you teaching the same people both? Are you teaching one class where are they learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and judo from you? Is that a separate program? If they are separate programs, do they blend? How does that work?
Yeah, so I essentially, at my club, we have kids class, teenage class, adult judo, and our adult judo class. If it's only me running it, then I'll differentiate, like I said before. Or if I'll have a fundamental, I'll go, hey everyone, Murray's down here running fundamentals, where he's going to be focusing on Osoto, and advanced will be down this end doing combinations into and out of Osoto. So that's our judo program. And then jiu-jitsu is after judo, and I'll do the same thing. We're doing arm bars today. Murray's down there doing arm bars from guard. I'm doing arm bars from back. Or you can come down this end and open mat and do whatever you like. And so that's how I kind of do it. So judo and jiu-jitsu would be completely separate.
Okay.
Yeah. If we are doing Newaza, sometimes I'll say, hey guys, a judo guy will react like this and a jiu-jitsu guy will react like this, mainly based on the sport rules.
Right.
So for example, I'm running a seminar in maybe 3 weeks, and the guy said, I've got heaps of judo guys, heaps of jiu-jitsu guys. Can you run Newaza transitions? And I'm like, Newaza transitions with half judo, half jiu-jitsu, you almost can't do it because it's completely different sports. The jiu-jitsu guy's going to land on his back and pull guard. The judo guy's going to belly out and land on his tail. So the transitions are going to be 2 separate classes.
Right. That's what really separates the 2 sports, really, is the transition.
Sports. Even look at half guard, like a judo guy is just going to hug your leg as tight as they can and not let it go. Where a jiu-jitsu guy, they're going to get underhook and try, all these different. So it's like often it depends on the sport. So I usually say a jiu-jitsu reaction will be this, a judo reaction will be this.
Right.
A judo guy in turtle is just going to mainly just turtle up or belly out on their stomach and just tie it up. Where a jiu-jitsu guy is going to get up, turn and face and whatever. So you have to be ready for both reactions, but that's when the sports really separate.
Right. So I guess the one thing that's interesting, I don't want to get into the weeds about rule changes in judo, but one thing that I do find fascinating is the evolution of judo and how it changes. Rule changing, I guess, to a degree plays a factor. Removing the ability to grab legs changed the way people did kataguruma. It didn't remove kataguruma at all. So I don't know how much you follow the international. I would expect a pretty significant amount, especially with your connection and your background competitively. But do you follow the current IGF tour quite a bit, or?
Not as much as I used to. I think mainly because I don't know as many, back in the day, we're like, I used to fight that guy. Now I didn't, I had that less connection, to see. Some of them still compete, but I don't follow it as much as I should. But also now I've got 3 kids. I homeschool them. So it's like, I just have less time plus the club. So
you're a brave man.
Yeah. So I don't follow it as much as I used to.
Right.
But yeah, still pretty.
Yeah, because the reason that I ask is I find it so fascinating to see the evolution of judo and how we're seeing more and more, in a sense, at times, of regional differences in how judo is performed. The British have always been well known, going back to Neil Adams and maybe before, but as this Newaza strong country. That was like one of the big things. We used to call one rolling choke in Canada the British rule, as an example. Or you look at the stylistic qualities of the Mongolian team, how that stands out so much still, or the Georgian judo program, or the Koreans, or the Japanese. So so I just sort of, if there's anything that stands out to you that you've seen, I guess, even since you've been producing these videos and producing this content, things that you've noticed change or adapt, or the utilization of different techniques so much more now or recently than in the past.
I think the biggest evolution has been that kind of that elbow up uchimata, the pushing the head down, like really go for a big kosoto. They step back out with their head down. And rather than trying to get underneath in that classical style, they're really just pushing the head down and just throwing the leg up, which I actually really like. I think it's an easier way to perform it and to teach it. To see that sort of wind. It's just been really cool.
Yeah. One that stands out to me that might be we're of a similar age is if you would have known, but back I used to be a huge fan of Uchimata Tsukashi. And the thing that I found interesting is starting around 2001, there was a 66 kilogram Iranian world champion, Irash Mirzmeli. Yeah. And in the 2001 world final, he did an Uchimata Gaeshi. People call it the stretchy or whatever. Yeah. But this massive one in the finals that I remember watching 100 times and not understanding what happened. He gets launched in the air and then somehow the guy rotates under him and he throws him. And to see Uchimata Tsukashi almost not be performed anymore. And this Uchimata Gaeshi is how you counter Uchimata now is one that really stands out to me because I learned Uchimata Tsukashi in the 80s and that's what everyone did. And then one day everyone's doing the other and Uchimata Tsukashi is this beautiful throw that's sort of gone at the moment.
Yeah. And I think now they don't even score it as a technique anymore, like IJF level. If you've done it, you probably haven't done any of the recent, because it's not a throw. It's not a like what throw is it? It's called, it's kind of called nothing. You have to, the one where you just kind of just push them over.
Right.
But I remember you're right I was mainly through the 90s and my coaches would go to Japan, but mainly Korea. And they'd come back and be like, check out this throw called Soto Tsurukomagoshi, like, with the two sleeves.
Right.
And then they'd come back and go, check out this Katagruma from, remember Vazakashvili, the 66 Georgian.
Right.
Katagruma, drop Katagruma, Ukiwaza. And then they'd come, here's the Jun Uchimata,
Oh my God. Yeah.
And then it became the Koga stuff.
Right.
But now there's the Ono Uchimata,
Right.
But really, that's kind of it. There's not as much kind of, I guess, humongous heroes like some of those guys that really changed the landscape.
Yeah. The ones that stand out to me is I was speaking to Emidio about this. There's the eras of, I like to call them judoka's favorite judoka. So you had Yamashita, obviously. And then you had Koga. Everyone loved Koga. And the one that I missed when I was naming them off was Shohei, not Shohei. Oh man, now I can't think of his name. Kosei Inoue. Kosei Inoue is one that I sort of skip past. I mean, Kosei Inoue had as hot a streak as you can have in just a world-class throw. And then you had Iliadis following him, who was just so magnificent. And then, I'd say after that, you had a sort of transitionary gap to Shohei, who's almost, Shohei Ono's almost unbeatable, shockingly lost to a German in the team competition of the Olympics, which was unexpected. But outside of that, he just doesn't seem to lose. He's so dominant with two throws, really. What we used to call, or this double collar, people call it the Korean grip, the one high collar and the second collar, this Osoto, and then this incredible Uchimata. And it's so like, if you're a righty, you're getting thrown Osoto. If you're lefty, you're getting thrown Uchimata. Like that's just, And the one too that stands out is Sode. Same thing is, I think post Koga did some Sodes with his Seos, and then you've just seen that throw explode with Abe Hifumi and world champion 81 kilograms from Israel, Sagi Muki. You have these guys that utilize it, and obviously Hifume's sister.
That's right. But, the Israeli team is coached by Oren Smadja, who was a Sode specialist.
Right.
And he came second to Koga. And they do nearly right the way through from 66 to 81. 60 to 81, they all do Sode and Soto Osoto, Sode into Osoto. Like, it's just so powerful.
Right. Yeah. When you go to that Osoto first and they react exactly what we were talking about before in terms of how you understand the transitioning of those techniques, punching that sleeve across and going for that Osoto, they step off of it. Now there's this huge Sode just waiting for you to throw them with.
That's right. And they're doing standing ones where the Cubans, they did that drop Sode for they've been doing that forever.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That was such a strong program, that Cuban program in the 90s.
Yeah, and then that kind of just fizzles. It's funny how they just fizzle. Like, it's just leadership or finances or culture.
Right. Maybe money.
I think money's a big one. pretty amazing.
Yeah, Aaron Sibio was a spectacular Sode. Oh, that's one of my all-time favorites. Watching that guy throw, like his Sode was so special to see. Oh man,
yeah,
he's like underrated, sick player to watch.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah, the Israeli program is one that stands out to me too. It's a popularity with which judo has ever since the world champion.
Zivi?
No, the
Jerby.
woman, Yarden Jerby. Yeah. Yarden. She won her world champion title, and then all of a sudden, judo just seemed to explode in popularity. They're housing Grand Prix, and they're sellouts, and they hosted the Europeans, and everyone's on their feet, and the team has become so strong.
Yeah,
it makes me want to go there and see what other things they're doing to create that. Like, what's the culture that's getting created there to make judo so. I'd love to replicate that in Canada, Australia, and these places.
I'd love, imagine having like unlimited funding. I'd spend a week with Jimmy Pedro, a week with like Jason Morris.
Right.
I'd go to Sasha Mehmetovic and the kind of Gills Club. I've been there when I went there when I was 17 for a week.
Right.
And then imagine going to like with the Smadger in Israel.
Right.
Just be awesome.
Go
to like Brazil and just to be, it's mainly, and I'd also spend a week with Danaher just because of the culture. Like, how are you developing? How are you developing this? Because it's not just randoris. It's something else. It's something else that you're developing technical. How much technical to randori you're doing? So that's the thing we talked about prior about this kind of Japanese system of like, we're just going to do 1 million rounds of randori. And people think that's what the Japanese do. But when you go there, when you rock up to training at 4:00, they're in the gis already. And they've been there for an hour. They're doing technique for an hour. Just the funsies. Then you do 2 or 3 hours of randori. And when you go home, they're still there chatting after class, mucking around. And you kind of go, no, they do 2 or 3 hours of randori. But they were here before we were here doing technique.
Right.
Like, they don't just do randori.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, there's a little more to it. Yeah, the countries that have, I like to look at countries as a Canadian. We think of ourselves as small. We're not that small, really. When you compare our population to European population bases, we're approaching 40 million, I think, in Canada now. So pretty big population, although it's spread over a gigantic area. But I love to look at countries that have a small population base, and then what makes that special. Like, if I had that endless money where I could go, my tour for sure would go Israel, and it would go to Georgia, and it would go to Mongolia. And those 3 countries combined for a population of about 20 million people combined between the 3, and 3 of the top 7 countries in the world in terms of judo performance. There's something to that there's something different being done. Yeah.
And it's a mindset thing. Like, there's that book, it's called The Outliers. And he talks about that.
Malcolm Gladwell.
There's a tennis. Yeah, there's that tennis club in Russia, and there's 30 members, but they've got the top 10 players in the world, sort of thing. And it's like, well, what are they teaching? It can't just be technique. It's mindset of like, you will be the best.
Right.
Yeah, like it's that culture behind it rather than just the sheer hard work. It's more than that.
Right. Yeah, and that reminds me too. We were talking a little bit earlier. Is the 2000 Olympics that were in Sydney? The Australian team put up absolutely incredible results in a number of sports. And I read a book, I believe it's called The Sports Gene. If you haven't read The Sports Gene, it's fantastic. It talks about physiology and how certain things. So for instance, your ability to be a good high jumper is based primarily, the height of your jump is based primarily on your Achilles tendon. There's 2 options. You can have a really big Achilles tendon, a really long one. When you look at a guy like Kevin Durant in the NBA, his Achilles tendon seems endless. And then the other one is if your Achilles tendon is incredibly firm. So what you have is you have a very, very strong spring or a very, very big spring. And that dictates, obviously, there can be some fluctuation based on your strength development. But for the most part, that spring is going to decide how high you can jump. So if you don't have a super firm or a really big Achilles tendon, it doesn't really matter. And this writer spoke about the Australian programs taking athletes from some programs, doing physical tests on them, and taking national athletes and moving them to different sports based on where their body could compete. And I found that really interesting, that the Australians did that in the 90s going into those 2000 Olympics. And you look at the success of the 2000 Olympics for the Australian team, for a country of that population base and so isolated, unbelievable results. So yeah, it's more than just, there's more to it. It's not just your ability to perform a technique.
Yeah, that's right. We had a whole heap of Japanese judo players come to Australia, to the Australian Institute of Sport, and Inoue came as well, and a few, maybe 2 or 3 national team members, plus a whole heap of junior national team members. They came and trained with the Australian team. But we tested the Australians, the sports scientists tested the Australians with like deadlift, bench press, beep tests, like heaps of different stuff. Then they tested the Japanese, and at the end of all the results, they had them doing all sorts of different stuff. But what they found was the main difference, the Australians were just as strong as the Japanese, except for the Japanese could develop a huge amount of force from a stopped position. So they, like when you do a bench press, if you lower it and push it. So if I go like that stretch reflex, down, up, I can lift 100. But if I go down, pause, up, I can only lift. They found that the Japanese could lift almost double what all the Aussies could do. Wow. They could generate, they think about judo where you're both stuck in a right on right situation. Right. They could generate a huge amount of force from that position, boom, where the Aussies couldn't. They think about that in terms of creating space, and they did it with like, they made him deadlift a bar that's like, 1,000 kilos. You couldn't move it. Rest for 10 seconds and do it. They had all these different, and they just said, we don't know what the Japanese are doing, but what we do know, and there's a massive amount of power generation from a stopped position. It's just really interesting.
Yeah. The other one that's interesting too that you mentioned earlier is when we were talking about what was the quote? Judo technique
conquers all.
Technique conquers all. And I agree that it's important to be obsessive about technique, and we should never do anything at the cost of technique. I agree with that 100%. But sometimes what's a flippant thing that's often said is, don't use strength, don't worry about muscle, do technique. And what I like to tell people is that our skeleton is a puppet to our musculature, right? So our skeleton only does what our muscles allow it to do. So the stronger we are and the more efficient that our muscles move, the better we operate. And everything that we do in judo technically is done by our body in that physical sense. So if we're stronger.
So Josh, can I be back in like 2 minutes?
Sure.
Just had to say there's a crazy guy at judo downstairs. I'll just be back in a second.
Okay, sure. This episode is brought to you by Matsudo Canada. It's the #1 supplier of martial arts gear in Canada, and they produce not only beautiful uniforms, but also amazing apparel and world-class IJF certified mat surfaces. Known for their customization and embroidery options, there is no one else you should look to for whatever needs you may have. Please use promo code A Fighting Chance at checkout to receive a discount.
Sorry, Josh.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, that was hectic.
What happened?
So I rent my dojo's inside a church, and so we rent kind of the auditorium space.
Right.
We're outside the church is a massive playground, so the kids play on the playground. And a dude was walking past the church. He had a bow and arrow, and my son Rocky goes, "That guy's got a bow and arrow!" And then the guy went off it. Rocky's only 7. Started yelling at him, saying, "I'm going to shoot you with the bow and arrow." Arrows and everything. So.
Oh my God! In the middle of the day on a Saturday, that's Australia, I guess. So yeah, as you had said before, in terms of the importance of technique, I totally agree how important technique is. But our body is moved and operated by our muscles, so it's a really great concept to say muscles are, don't use your muscles, don't do that, don't use strength, just use technique. But us performing the technique is a requirement that our body does it. So it's really important for sure that you focus on technique and not to do things at the cost of technique. But at the same time, the efficiency with which you perform technique is based on the efficiency that your body moves and operates. And so if your goal is to become a high performance athlete, don't tell yourself, I need to just be technically sound at judo. If you want to be the best in the world, you have to be a spectacular athlete, period. That's just an expectation. You have to do that. You have to be, you have to have all the things of understanding judo and being technically sound at judo and having the strategy. But if you're not a great athlete, it doesn't matter how beautiful your throw is, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you have zero ankle and knee stability, good luck doing uchimata.
Right.
Like if you can't stand on one leg and have good stability,
right,
well, your uchimata's you're just gonna fall over on your face all the time. Or if you've got no core strength and someone just hips in a little bit, you're just
right,
gonna fall over.
right.
So it's so important. And it's actually easy to get a strong body and athletic. It's way harder to build technique.
That's for sure.
And the clubs or the coaches might say, "I just got to be strong," and you can see it in their athletes. The athletes are super strong, super stiff, no loose.
Mm-hmm.
They can see their throws coming a mile off, and you go, because they're like their surete is like, and they just can't move. And you go, "Mate,
right.
You guys need to spend less time in the gym and more time at judo."
Right.
And the club down the road, they need to spend more time in the gym and less at judo. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of that balance, but you can. Yeah, being strong is important.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing too, because most of the world looks at the Japanese program, rightfully so, because of how spectacular they are, for sure. But what's sometimes lost is, again, there's misconceptions of how people train. So when we think of the Japanese, oh, they just do judo and they just do a couple hours of judo a day. And as you said, well, when I was there, they were on the mats before we left. We got there and they were on the mats after we left. And it also takes into account, like, do you know what they're doing for weights? Do you know if they're doing weights? And one that's always interesting to me is we had an Olympian in 1992 named Roman Hatashita, who I know quite well. So Roman, I remember talking to him once. So he fought 71 kilograms, now 73 kilograms. And in that division was Koga. So he goes, I'm getting ready for weigh-ins. And there's all these Europeans. And he said, they're shredded and ripped and abs and whatever, just jacked. And he's like, and then I looked at Koga, who almost looked a little chubby in the belly. He's like, and then I looked at his legs and each one looked like the size of my waist. And he's like, that's where the power comes from. He was not weak. He was incredibly powerful. And the same thing I've seen on his Instagram is Shohei when he's running the stairs and you look at the picture of Shohei's legs and you're like, he looks like a speed skater. His legs are enormous. There's so much power generated there. Don't think that the Japanese aren't weight training. Don't think it's only judo. These are strong, phenomenal athletes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the stronger your base is, I mean, I hate fighting people with that short, big legs. I hate fighting those players. I'd rather fight a tall, skinny guy any day of the week.
Right.
Those short. Also, I've had a knee Rico, so I don't like kind of hooking in for the Owuchi, the Tanya Toshi when you hooked in.
Right.
And so if they're short with those big legs, I'm like, I'm not throwing my leg in there.
Right. Yeah. You can have it.
I'm out. You can throw me. Tanya Tosh, go for it. Just don't break my leg in half.
Right. Yeah, but that strong base, it's true. Like that's where so much balance comes from. So again, in ice hockey or hockey, if you've ever seen an NHL player in person or met them, they're not big hulking guys. You think of Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid or Wayne Gretzky or most of them. I mean, some of them are big men. Milan Lucic is huge, but when you see a lot of these guys, what is always the same is they're pushing with their legs all day, and that's their balance. When people are body checking you in the sport, you look at the lower half of these men and they're huge, thick, because they got to stay balanced on ice when people are hitting them. And that balance doesn't come from biceps, doesn't come from pecs. It comes from huge legs. And judo is the art of breaking and keeping your own balance, really. So having this super strong base is what's going to give you lifting power. It's going to keep you balanced when people attack you.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's true too, the idea of getting strong. And that's the other part that I think can provide some hope for other people in terms of what they want to do. Well, I'm not strong. I'm not naturally strong. I'm not physically a dominant force. Getting strong isn't such a scary process. Look up a linear progression model, look up a starting strength model, something like that. You don't have to be the strongest guy in judo, especially if you're technically sound, but you do have to be strong. You can put on a lot of strength, not muscle mass and weight. Okay. That's steroids, but you can't do that quickly, but you can get significantly stronger in a few months. You can be measurably stronger just following some kind of basic solid strength training model.
Yeah. That's right.
In terms of, Australia is such an isolated part of the world outside of your very close neighbors. How much access did you have as an athlete to get to other parts of the world to do your training and get to competitions? Like, I can only imagine if you were to do a European tour, how much jet lag would affect you.
Oh yeah, jet lag. Yeah, I remember like going to places and people would be like, "You're from Australia? That's so far away." Like when I was in like South America, or they're like,
Mhm.
"Wow, how long did it take to get here?" You're like, "Oh, 2 days." You know,
Right.
it was cool when we had a World Cup in Samoa, and we had like I think Nick Tritton, Sasha Mehmetovic has been
Right.
there, kind of
Right.
that Canadian team, the back a while ago now.
Right.
I
Those have
think
been like late 2000, early 2010 range, maybe
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
2008, 2010. Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, it's so far away." I'm like, "Finally, you know what it feels like."
Right.
Like, like there's some Brazilian, like Canto was there. It was like, this just took me like 3 days to get here.
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, now you know what it feels like to be just jet lagged and tired." And
Right.
it's just all part of it. Like that, you want to be there. You want to be at the tournament. So you're going to be, you know that you're going to be tired. So you just gotta just do it.
Right. Like it's easy to make yourself a victim in terms of the challenges that we face. Canadians feel that way too. Oh, look how big the country is. Look how far we have to travel to get to these events. Look how far when we go to Europe, we're at such a disadvantage against the Europeans. Okay, well, that's our plight. That's the situation. We get to live in a beautiful country. It's really nice. Like we have lots of benefits too. So there is challenges, but and to that point, it's like, I haven't thought about it that much before, but as challenging as it may be, I believe from being from that era of Nick Tritton and Sasha Mehmetovic and those guys being close contemporaries and friends of mine that I still stay in close contact with. For people that aren't aware, Sasha Mehmetovic was the coach leading to the Tokyo Olympic Games, where Canada had 4 people fight for a medal, worked very closely with Katrin Boschman-Pinard, who took a bronze medal in those games. So very successful last number of years for him coaching. Is what I believe they started doing more so then, or that was my memory, is instead of flying to Europe for an event or two, they were going for sometimes 4 and 5 weeks, the Canadian team, so that, yes, maybe the first event wasn't perfect, but they would stay a little bit longer, get a training camp in, get their body acclimatized. And then by the second and third event, they'd be in a much better place to perform. So I'm not sure if that's what you got to do, or if you're seeing more of that now, or if you'd know.
Yeah, definitely seeing more of it now. We didn't really have that. We would often just fly in, do a tournament, do the training camp, do the next tournament, fly home,
Right.
essentially. We
Right.
didn't, I think the longest I spent overseas was like, I did 2 months in Japan, but that was just training, not like tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think now they're spending longer and longer blocks in Europe and
Mm-hmm.
overseas. And what the Australians are doing now is they're kind of choosing not those A-level, Premier level tournaments, but we're choosing kind of the smaller tournaments, because there's no point going to Tokyo Grand Slam and losing first round. Now, it is good to fight Tokyo Grand Slam, but if you can go to a local tournament in Germany and have 8 fights, well, that's
Right.
going to be way more beneficial long term for your athlete development
Right.
than doing one fight at a Tokyo Grand Slam. So I know the Aussies have looked at some of those lower level tournaments and entered them and had come away with 4 or 5 fights, which is kind of way better.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. The other thing that's maybe vastly sometimes underrated is, if you're only going to the major ones, which are, no matter who you are, we've seen the best athletes lose. If those are the only ones you're going to, and you're going under the circumstances with which Canadians, or more so Australians, are, you're putting yourself in a position to fail in the hardest tournaments. It's very hard to become a confident athlete. And
yeah.
so the success begets success. So going to events where you can succeed, following that with tougher events after you've had an amount of success, knowing it's possible, maybe beating a guy or two that's really good, or a woman or two on the women's side that's really good, rather than knowing you have to beat 5 of them in one event. Getting some of those wins beforehand, I think can lead to a lot more. I'm capable of doing this. I've done it a little. But if you're just going to Tournoi de Paris or Paris Grand Slam, or you're just going to the Tokyo Grand Slam, like or just the Worlds, like these are such massive.
Yeah, I remember once I did I call it the Pan American trip, but I did Miami World Cup. I had 4 fights. I lost 2. Then I did US Open, maybe I think 2 days later, and I had maybe 4 matches then.
Right.
Then we went to Pan America. We went to Venezuela, lost first round. But then we went to El Salvador. But it was cool because I think I won 3 matches and then I lost 2, so I had 5 fights, or maybe it was 4 fights. But either way, what was cool was I'm like, oh, I'm in the finals block. You know how the mat area, the warm-up area, at the start of the day, it's stacked. There's no space.
Right.
First round, half are gone. Second round, another half are gone.
Right.
And it was cool to be like, oh, wow, I'm still one of the guys going.
Right.
I'm still in this. And that's a world champion, and he's in the stands. And that guy's a Grand Prix medalist, and he's in the stands. He's finished for the day, but I'm still going.
Right.
That was just really cool. But I only got snapshots of that throughout my career, and the best in the world get that at every tournament.
Right.
And so that was kind of because I was, there's Olympians and then there's Olympians, like there's Olympians and there's black belts and there's black belts, like it's layers and levels. But it was cool for me to be like, this is what all those top guys go every tournament. They have this thing where there's more space in warm-up area now because I'm still going and they're not. So that was kind of cool for me. But that was 2011, and then I retired from competition in 2012. So I didn't kind of doing that sort of stuff. But
the other thing about it too is there's like you get a taste of that, even though it's at a very small level, but you get a taste when you compete in finals at some events of the seduction of knowing that people are now watching you, because there's only a couple matches and most people are in the stands. So knowing that and feeling like you're performing to some degree, which is a kind of a seductive thing, I think, to a sense, and you get a taste of. Now, this is very minor. We're talking about judo, but you think of like professional athletes or boxers with that big fight, or a UFC fight, or an NBA player, and it's not the same, but you sort of get a hint of it. You are now on a stage when you get to be in an event like that, where the thing is shut down and you're in the final block and it's and it's one thing that I love now is watching the IGF tour, and that it's in high definition and that it's commentated and they black out the rest of the area and it's one mat and they have the super slow motion, and it makes the judo event feel like a real event, is one thing that I love, because I love judo and the idea of it being more popular, that it's more viewer friendly. That's got to feel great as an athlete too, to know like that's how I'm going to look if I made the final. Arthur Majalidan fighting in those positions from Canada, things like that. Super awesome to see now. As you were,
it's really good. IGF have done a really good job with
the world championships, when they do those super slow motion shots in the finals and stuff, those are just sick.
And 361, camera, there's like 300. That's amazing.
So sick. Amazing. Yeah, it's like that. I absolutely love that stuff, just because it's like, I just think, I go, oh, judo looks like the NBA, judo looks like the NHL. Like you see it, the production quality is so good. And then you hear Neil and you're like, that's judo, the voice of judo. That's super exciting for me as a fan. So the one other area that I was interested in, as we said before, you're a person that started producing this video content at a time when people weren't really producing video content and it wasn't really there. What was the influences on judo in Australia? We got booted for a second there.
I'm back.
Perfect. So yeah, I was going to ask, here, one sec. So at the start, we talked about how you were one of the first people to produce a lot of video content for judo, and that not a lot of people were doing it. And then not only did you produce it, you produced it in a really nice way that was really presentable, and then got a lot of traction. Like you have videos with, I don't know, 600,000 views, maybe more. That's one that I just recently saw was 600,000. So, a lot of people were actually taking your content in. So not only did you do it, but you did it to the point where people notice, and people all over the world see which is a pretty awesome thing. And it's exciting for me that to see a judo person get people following them all over the world is really exciting. But because you were one of the first people to do it, and knowing how far away you are from the rest of the world, we often had people come to Canada from other places, and that would influence the judo scene in Canada. Famously, Sensei Nakamura is Nicola Gill's coach. He came from Japan, I believe, in the early 70s and started running what became our national program. So what were the influences to get judo into Australia? And was that a regular occurrence? Did you have often visitation? How did you guys get more influence to get before you could just see it, before it was available like it is now?
Yeah, you know how we're talking, I think at the start of this, how you're like, oh, there's this guy's an Olympic medalist and this guy's an Olympian and this guy's like, Australia's so close to Japan and we have no Japanese coaches in Australia. We've got one down in Melbourne, a Japanese coach from that I can think of, but we seem to not have these high level, like you said, oh, they've got this guy from maybe Cameroon or Australia just seems empty of top level foreign players. Don't seem to come to Australia. I just think it's just, I don't know why. But so I think one of the major influences for judo was our old head coach, pretty much from Atlanta, I think, right the way through to Beijing. It was a guy called Peter Herman. He was one of the major influences in our high performance program. He was a German, came second in the world back in the 60s, moved to France, and I think he actually put the French Federation on the map. So he took the French judo from here to the top, and then he moved to Australia and then took on our high performance program. So Peter Herman was probably the main influence. Another guy, maybe Arthur Morset as well. But so for us, I think for me growing up, most of the judo we got was just from my coaches going to Korea and Europe and Japan to kind of just teach judo and that sort of stuff. Is that a question? Or are you talking about even earlier, like 100 years ago, how did judo kind of...
No. I'm talking about like in your era, lifetime growing up in judo, where were you getting outside influence to develop technique in judo to become the judoka you are? You didn't have you on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, the fighting films DVDs, right? So do you remember when I think modern competition judo was Karen Briggs, Neil Adams, pretty much all the fighting films content. I think everyone around the world through that time was that content.
The highlights of the world championships that would come out after 101 Pawns.
Yeah, and back then they were really good. They showed all the repechage matches as well. Where now they show not as much, but now they don't really make those kind of DVDs anymore. But yeah, so all those fighting films content is where we learned stuff, and then just coaches going overseas. But we didn't really have many visiting people from other countries coming here and that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like I was really fortunate in 1993, Hamilton, Ontario held the World Championships. And so in 1993, I got to watch Nicola Gill of Canada take a silver medal at Worlds after he had medaled at the Olympics. He was like 21 at the time. Nicola Gill, if people are watching this that aren't Canadian or don't know that much about him, he medaled in the Junior Worlds, I believe, in 1991, the Olympics in 92, and the Worlds in 93, and then again in 95. Just an absolute monster.
He came second in Sydney too.
Yeah. And the guy that beat him in the 92 Olympics in the semifinal was the first ever and only second to this point to have Olympic titles in two different weight classes. Legion won the 88 Olympics in 78 and the 92 Olympics in 86. That's who beat him in the semifinal. The person who beat him in the final of the 2000 Olympics is Kosei Inoue. So the two people that got in his way are two of the all-time great judoka of all time. And he actually carried the flag for us in the opening ceremonies of the Athens Olympics in 2004. Wow. Pretty cool. That doesn't happen for judoka in Canada. Never happened before. But in those 93 Worlds, I got to see Jason Morris take a bronze medal, and he fought against Jung of Korea, maybe one of the greatest judoka ever. Yamashita was just there. I got to just meet him because he happened to be there. And it was just so cool to see. Those 93 Worlds were amazing. Darcel Yanzi took a medal in those Worlds. To just see that kind of level and the influence that had on me. I got to carry the flag for, as a 10-year-old, I got to carry the flag for Uzbekistan in the opening ceremonies, actually. So it was just such a cool influence, that super fortunate that they had happened to decide to have the Worlds in Hamilton in 93, a weird location. Like what led to that, I don't even know. But yeah, like I guess you guys haven't had outside of the 2000 Olympics, obviously, which may have had some impact on the judo community there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I had a massive, because I started judo in 1990, and then my brother and I got really good, but it was at a recreational club. So the coach at the time said, "Can you go to the club up the road where they're training for their kind of pretty much Barcelona, Athens, and then moving into Sydney?" So between 95 and 2000, the government put a ton of money into national development of all sports, which you talked about before. Yeah. And but then I could volunteer at tournaments. Remember just doing hajime and mate on the timer, and being this 10-year-old going, he went to the Olympics, and then you get to see them fight and you get to talk to them. And for me, that was just awesome to see, like Olympians in the flesh. You get to watch them fight. and that sort of stuff. So that was a massive kind of influence on me.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. But now we have the Olympics in 2032, are in Gold Coast, which is like the northern part of Australia. So now I've got kids in my classes now that are 10 that are like, I'm going to those Olympics. So the Olympics or the Worlds in your country is a massive influx of like kids going, I could be that. I could actually fight there. So I've got 3 kids that have gone 2032 Olympics. I'm going because it's in Australia. So
Yeah, I didn't realize that had been inked. So that's exciting.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Like growing up, they had such an impact on me. Like one of the biggest moments in my whole life wasn't a judo thing, but a memory that stands out to me so much in my life, I guess you could say, was Donovan Bailey winning the 96 Olympics in the 100-meter dash as a Canadian, watching him win that race and how big it was. And we had lost a gold medal. 1988, famously, Ben Johnson was stripped of his gold medal for steroid use. And Donovan Bailey won the 96 Olympics and set a world record doing it. And I remember in my town of 3,000 people, everyone is outside screaming out their door, he did it, like down the street. Like how big a moment, how sport can affect us in such a huge way and create such community is such a powerful thing. And I think judo is especially powerful that way. The bond that you create with people doing judo together is such a powerful bond, I think. Yeah, like most of my best friends in my life are all people that I trained with. I'm still very close with Sasha Mekmetovich and Sergio Pessoa and all these guys, and these are all the guys that I trained with for all those years. You don't get that same bond at work, typically, with normal work or with school. Yeah, that's a friend from school, whatever. But when you train with someone and put that much time in and try to beat the hell out of each other, there's something, it creates some kind of bond at a deeper level that I would probably estimate is similar to people in the military.
Yeah. Even if you do like a trip, if you trip overseas trip with them, like if you go to a hard training place, like I remember like being at Scuba or like Tokai, sometimes you can have, a bit of hard fights with someone and they beat you up and they drop the knee in or throw you against the wall. And then I'm like, Evo decided he went to London. Can you bash that guy for me? Because I can't bash him. And then Evo gets in there and, sorts him out for you. But it's just funny, like it's that I've got your back, like that teamwork. And it really does. It goes beyond that. And it's kind of like with a lot of your judo friends, it's like, even if you quit judo today, we're actually still going to be friends forever because it's beyond judo. Like we're friends not because of judo. Judo was the start, but we're actually friends not because of judo, but because of more than that. And I think that's just really, really cool.
Yeah, I think judoka as a general rule is a very passionate group of humble people that are incredibly hardworking. And so when you put that together, it's such strong character traits that drive you. It's like this friend and I work so hard. Frazer Will's another one, like a really, really close friend of mine. And when I was at the National Training Center, I used to watch Frazer and I would just go, if I can keep up with him, then I'm doing a good job. Because he was just a training animal and seventh. I just
want his pecs as big as him. Like that's all.
Physiologically, he's pretty impressive, dude. He looks like
We fought in Miami World Cup. I think he beat me by Rezayee, but it was a big Rezayee, one of those big ones. It was a big one.
Yeah. Like it wasn't to Nippon, but it was a big throw.
Yeah, sure, that's right.
Yeah. I was 73 and he was 60, and we would do randori, and periodically, this is the time when you could grab the legs. There was a height advantage, I'll say, but maybe it was for him because you'd be doing judo and all of a sudden, before you know it, I'm on his shoulders, across his shoulders, getting tossed around, and he'd just get under you so easily with this wide, strong base that, great player. Yeah, so I guess the one other area that I was interested in is with this, as you were saying before, you're seeing more and more clubs operate at a full-time, more full-time basis, and the influence that you've had on judo in Australia is, where do you see, what's your sort of hopes and position in terms of where judo's going in Australia now?
Well, I think judo's going awesome, but also Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is just so popular, isn't it? So I'm really keen on, like I read a stat online, I don't know if it's true, but there's 6,000 judo players in Australia, but there's probably 6,000 clubs, jiu-jitsu clubs in Australia, it's just so popular. Like in Australia, I think there's maybe 7 full-time judo clubs that and some of them are like judo and jiu-jitsu or judo and MMA, or it's judo and But in my town, there's 7 full-time jiu-jitsu clubs.
Oh my God. How big is your town?
Maybe 400,000.
Right. It's a lot.
But in Australia, there's only 7 full-time judo clubs nationwide. But in my town alone, there's 7 full-time judo clubs, jiu-jitsu clubs. So you go jiu-jitsu is just because anyway. So what I'd love to see is more and more like my generation players like myself, Ivan Santos, Dennis Iverson, Stephen Brown, Daniel Kelly. We all now run our own facilities teaching judo, jiu-jitsu, MMA, whatever. So hopefully the next generation going, oh, we can actually make a living from this. Right. And that can produce more full-time dojos, which will then get more people through the doors, more people hopefully staying longer, loving judo, benefiting their life. And I think the bigger judo gets, the bigger it's going to get. You know, like when my club started, I had 3 members, and then those 3 people told 3 people. Right. And now I've got 250. They tell 250 people, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I'm really excited to see hopefully more people going, oh, you can make a living from judo, and then start investing in a dojo and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of where I do see it heading. Right. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's the one thing that we had talked about a little bit before we started chatting on recording, I guess, is that taking judo and making it more professional is a necessity for judo to grow. It doesn't make you a bad person because you want to make a living. And in fact, for you to do the job that you need to do is looking at it in a professional way is going to vastly influence how big of an impact you can have. You can impact more people. You can teach more people how to live a healthy lifestyle. Not everyone's going to be competitive, and not everyone should be competitive. And it's not a necessity for everyone to be competitive. 10% of your students become athletes. That's a lot of people. So that means you're helping 90% of these people become judoka, become better people, create these incredible social bonds.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's still a million recreational judo clubs out there, and that's awesome. But you find a lot of recreational clubs, sometimes they ebb and flow. So there was one in Australia that had like 150 members, but then one coach moves away, another one moves away because might be a mining town, and before you know it, the club's shut down. Right. But if someone ran it as a business, it would actually continue going. Right. I know with my I have a University of Judo website where I've got like 2,000 videos probably now of just whatever you can think of. Type in Taitoshi, search it, and there's a million. It's a paid subscription service, like a monthly kind of subscription. And I had someone email me and say, why would I pay you $30 a month to access all your content when at my club I've got 3 eighth degree black belts and 5 7th degrees and 3 6th degrees and 10 5th degrees? I'm like, well, obviously my content's not for you. If you have that many people at your club, that's awesome. But so some recreational clubs can have a large volunteer base to keep it going, but most after a time it just fizzes out, and so or they might stay 30 members the entire time. It's been going for 30 years, and they'd have 30 members forever. But for me, I'm like, if we can get big clubs with whatever numbers they can handle that's sustainable for a long period of time, then it's going to help society and people kind of grow and get better. Right.
Yeah. Like the different parts of the world, you know, I recently moved to the northern part of Canada, where I was explaining 1.5 million kilometers squared. We have 45,000 people that live here. There's many communities in the territory that I live. You can only get there by airplane. So for us to go to Inuvik, where we have an operational dojo, that is a 2-hour flight from where I live, and I can't drive there unless I drive. It's about a 54-hour drive. I have to drive down to another province, across a province, up through another territory, and across. I can't drive there any other way. It's a 2-hour flight. So this content being available, it may not be necessary if you are a premium athlete at Tokai University. Then maybe you're not going to use yourself as a reference. Maybe not. Maybe Shohei Ono is not going to check out how to do Taitoshi. But there's a lot of people that don't have that kind of access, and making judo more accessible really goes back to that's what Kano was doing. Jigoro Kano, after he founded judo, sent judoka throughout the world to teach it, to make it more accessible. And this is sort of a modern version of what he's doing in a much more financially accessible way.
Yeah, because there's heaps of recreational judo clubs. I was on holidays once. I went to a local judo club. The level was so low, I was shocked at how low the level of instruction was. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy knows nothing. Not judging. My green belts know more than this guy, and he's a black belt.
Right.
Imagine if he just goes $30 a month, I'm going to go on Matt's website and I'm going to actually upskill myself.
Right.
And I'm like, these are the people I want to help. Guys like this that just don't have the time to search YouTube or don't have time to research or whatever. Right. They can actually find a higher level of instruction than what they currently know. Right. It's just going to help their club, and it's going to help them, hopefully. You know what I mean? Like, it's they're the people, the regional people you want to kind of want to help, and that's, which will then raise the level of judo because it'd be more enjoyable, and then and that just upskills them.
Yeah, and with learning becomes retention. You know, when kids feel like they learned everything that a coach can teach, they might not hang around as long. If that coach continues to improve and get better and teaches them new things, they're going to stay longer. If they stay longer, they're more likely to want to hang around and maybe become competitive, or maybe become a sensei themselves one day. So it leads to more and more of it. So it's a really important thing that a learning curve can still exist. And as judoka, we know all of us can always learn. I'm always learning judo. I'm always watching things. I'm watching your content, or I'm watching someone else's content, or I'm watching the tour, and we're always learning things and taking that information in. That's part of what makes judo so beautiful. And so if coaches can keep learning, then they're going to retain more, which is going to produce a bigger worldwide judo community, which is going to make better individuals as throughout the world. So it's, that's a huge, like, for me, one of my favorite things to teach is just the break fall. The idea that you should be a judoka for a day. If you learn how to fall safely, you're less likely to get hurt. You're more likely to stay in sport. You're less likely to die. You're less likely to break your hip. So just, we started doing single day seminars we call Learn to Fall for All. It's a free seminar where we come in, we just teach you how to fall. And that's just a hint of what judo is, but we've sort of monopolized how to fall. So if people just learn how to fall, they'll have a more fulfilling life, in my opinion, is the poetic way that I think about it. So to that end, just, I guess, where can people find you? I know you have a number of things. So you mentioned you have Judo University. So you have Judo University, you have Beyond Grappling, your YouTube channel.
Yeah. There's all the social media. Just search up Beyond Grappling and go from there. And if people have any questions or want me to clarify anything I said, I'm more than happy to kind of answer emails and Instagram inboxes and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks heaps for having me, Josh. It was really fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was great. It was great to finally talk to you in person to some degree, and I hope one day we cross paths in person actually.
And have a rumble. Have a randori.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, man.
No worries. Thanks a lot.